Welcome to the Dirty Side of Leadership podcast with Ron and Kristin, where leadership meets entertainment. This podcast features stories with names and certain aspects that have been changed to keep submissions private. Enjoy the show.
Welcome to the Dirty Side of Leadership podcast, where leadership meets entertainment. Ron and I are invested in your success in business and in life. In this episode, we want to help you have a strong influence and impact on others. We titled this podcast, 5 Essentials to Making an Impact. And thank you so much for joining us on this journey. Please take time to rate us, review us, and tell somebody about our podcast. Ron, how's it going?
It's going great. You know, I'm remodeling the studio, so everything here was covered in blankets and throw cloths just a few minutes ago, but I threw it off because the show must go on.
Yeah, you're huffing paint fumes. You might get a little silly towards the end of this hour.
Well, you know, what's new, right?
Oh, goodness.
All right, before we delve into today's topic, we're breaking down a meme or quote from one of our listeners each week. And I'm really excited about this, but this one comes from John Barney Barnes. He is a former Vietnam War pilot. He's an author. He's a phenomenal leader. Anyway, the quote comes from Carl Philipp Gottfried, or von Clausewitz, as most people know him. And he was asked about the value of relationships. And here's what he said. It is the value of the objective that determines the amount of sacrifice in terms of magnitude and duration. And we've got several, by the way, Kristin, more and more of these are piling in. We got some good ones. But I love this because we talked about already unstoppable habits, and your objective has to become so important. I used to say this when I teach on courage. The desire or the passion must go up and the fear goes down. And I believe that's what he's saying. In other words, it's how important it is the amount of energy you're going to give it and how long it's going to last. What's your thoughts on that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you can really apply that to so many factors in life. People say, oh, you know, this guy, I've been dating him. He just stopped talking to me, said he didn't have enough time, right? And it's like, you can find time for what's important. And so it's always about the why, or really what your focus is and what you're looking to achieve. So there's always times for what you're passionate about.
I'm so glad you said that. I had someone say to me, it was a girl said to me, well, he said he's just been too busy. I said, for a 2-minute text, take the hint.
Yeah.
Anyway.
He's just not that into you, unfortunately.
Hey, they should make a movie of that. That sounds good.
Hey. All right. Well, I have a funny one for you. So a few episodes back, you may or may not remember, I mentioned an ex-boyfriend of mine and how he once said the world needed more burritos on a LinkedIn post that was asking what the world needed more of. I had said world needed more forgiveness, and he said burritos. And I thought, God, what an idiot, in a loving way, right? But he wrote me today. This is what's really funny. So he writes me a LinkedIn message and he says, it was an analogy. If the insides are wet and bogged down, regardless of how high quality the tortilla is made, it will eventually fall apart. I'm like, all right. Hey, you know, there you go.
Kristin's ex-boyfriend, if you're listening, number one, I shouldn't have jumped on the bandwagon and called it a red flag. I thought it was hilarious, number one. So kudos to you. And now you're not only funny, you're obviously brilliant. So,
oh my gosh. Yeah,
anyway.
He's a good one. It's really funny though, because I said, hey, look, I hope you didn't take any offense to that. He's like, no, not at all. But he sends me a snapshot of what episode he had just watched. And I was like, oh crap.
Oh, Kristin, we won't do it now, but I've gotten in trouble multiple times because of this podcast.
Oh, really?
Some things I've said, yes.
Oh my gosh. Oh goodness. I'm sure people have just not said anything to me and they've heard it, but yeah, you just never know. We're drawing on actual real life events here. And so it's bound to happen at some point. But transitioning from that. So back to our topic here, there always seems to be a buzz these days about influence or impact, who has it, who lacks it. And often the conversations sound as if influence were a commodity that you can buy at the local store or install on your laptop. So although it's not that easy, people have more impact than they realize. And, you know, they simply fail to recognize opportunities to exercise it. So I know, Ron, we both agree with this. I'm going to share something here that we talk about this a lot in our episodes, but that's the person that loves to talk and doesn't like to listen. And, a great way to be influential is to be a great listener and be humble. And not so much, a lot of people, I know we all have those folks in our meetings that talk just to hear themselves talk, and they're not saying anything of substance. Ron, I'm sure you've experienced that a dozen times, if not more.
Yeah. I've probably done it a few times, truth be told, but go ahead.
Maybe early, I'm going to throw you a bone here and say maybe early on in your leadership career, right? But really, if you think about characteristics of somebody who's humble and wants to listen and learn, is someone that would be more interested in hearing what other people have to say than in having them listen to him. Ultimately, I'm saying him, can be a he, she, whatever. Humility brings respect for others and for their thoughts. This person would place a modest value on their own opinions and admit that other people often have better ideas than they do. They willingly admit when they don't know something, or if they don't understand something, they're open about it. And lastly, they're willing to question their own position on an issue. This has happened to me so many times on my platform, my political platform. I'm very open to hearing from other sides. I don't necessarily think anyone's going to sway me. I'm just going to be honest there. But I do like to learn from other people that do have opposing views and opinions. And that is a sign of strength and leadership.
No, it really is. There is, and I don't want to conflict anything, but there is a fine line. I've known leaders who have all the characteristics that you have talked about, but they did not express an opinion in an assertive way when they needed to. There's a fine line that this, listening skills and being humble can elevate you, but you have to be careful not to make yourself a subordinate.
Right.
So there's that fine line, and that takes discretion. That takes intuitiveness to determine when to draw the line, when to speak up, when to listen. But yes, that's absolutely true. And if you can step up when you need to step up, you will be considered a phenomenal leader.
Right.
With these characteristics.
I like what you're saying, because far too many people, they walk in the shadows, so to speak. And that is, they think that what they have to say is not important, or maybe it wouldn't be a value add. And you do have to gauge that fine line you're talking about. And, really, I just want to ask you, what is an obvious time when somebody that is knowledgeable on a subject should speak up versus thinking that they just need to listen? Where's that middle ground?
Yeah, I think that sometimes takes coaching, because I have had those leaders who were either insecure for whatever reason, maybe even shy by nature. And sometimes you have to coach out of them, but they did have value to add, but they were hesitant to speak up. So I have met with people multiple times and said, hey, we want your opinion. We want you to speak up. Or I might call on them right in a meeting, and it helps prompt them. But you can see the courage start to build over time as people understand their psychological safety and they can speak up if you create that opening for them. So, it just, I think so many leaders fail to coach. They don't recognize you got this brilliance sitting here that, like you said, they hide in the shadows, and you've got to shine the light on them and help them develop that. And that's one of the things, by the way, I coached a female, and that was one of her issues. It was I've mentioned before, so I'm not going to go into it, but it was all male, the whole board except her. And she felt like she was being diminished. So I helped her work on her courage. She started speaking up, and we got some great testimonials out of that.
That's incredible. Coaching. I have to say, just an aha moment while you were explaining that. That's why I hold both Jasons in such a high regard, because they did that for me. I wasn't always someone that thought that everything I had to say was of impact, or, you know what I mean? I would sit back and listen and take in my environment. And they really encouraged me to really interject and be a bigger part of the team. So I really feel like that's why, when I reflect on their leadership, why it means so much to me, because I look at who I am today, and without people who believed in me in that setting, I wouldn't be here.
Sometimes when I'm talking to you, Kristin, I think they overdid it a little. So I may have to call the Jasons.
Oh my gosh. The pendulum has swung too far.
I kid.
Oh, I don't know. You're probably joking on the square,
You can't see my pinkies.
Oh my goodness. One of the Jasons actually, he messaged me because I randomly reached out and I said, what's a favorite quote of yours? And he shared it with me. And I'm just going to say it real quick since we're on the Jasons topic. So he said, this is my New York Jason. He said that success is not owned, it is leased, and rent is due every day.
Ooh, I love that
good?
one.
And he just pulled that one out of the back of his mind. But I thought that was awesome. So I told him I'd share.
Yeah, no, that's good. So, Kristin, you mentioned impact. The word influencer is used all the time, and we chose to use the word impact because influence is more of a slow, gradual thing, and that's good. But an impact can be in a moment. Something could really have an impact. And you can sway staffers, colleagues, clients, voters, neighbors. You are influencing, but you may only have a few moments to impact. And I love to watch political debates, and I love some of those one-line zingers that leave an impact. And when I teach communication, I talk about how if you speak with conviction and you focus on someone, you might say something at the right time and have an impact. So I wanted to explain why we're calling that. It's not, we want to influence over the long term, but there's those opportunities to really have an impact. And we want our listeners to rise to the occasion when the opportunity presents itself. There have been stories, and there's not a lot of time to go into this, where a child asked a question to a leader and changed the course of history. There's people who have had those moments. So be looking for those. If you work somewhere, look for those moments when you can step up to the plate and make that statement. Or if you know you have something important to say, make sure the other person is focused and listening. Now, that's not going to happen all the time. I've told the story about when Dr. Samples, my mentor, called me in his office and said, "Why don't you have a master's degree?" There wasn't no meet and greet. You want a donut? There was none of that stuff. He said, "Why don't you have a master's degree?" And I stammered around and tried to make excuses. And I literally walked down the hallway and said, "I have to get a master's degree."
Wow.
So anyway, we've already laid a great foundation, Kristin. Let's get into these 5 essentials. Now, I want to be very clear. This is definitely not an all-inclusive list. There's all kinds. We could go on and on. We could do 10 shows on this. So we picked out some of the impactful things that you don't hear all the time, or maybe we're going to put a little bit different spin on it than what you've heard before. So we're assuming you already have the core competencies for your position. You have to be competent. Come on. So we know that. And I always talk about build your knowledge base, expand your horizons, all those things. So let's start off. Let's do number 1. People of impact represent what you need at a critical moment, much like Dr. Samples did for me. A quick story, and this has a great ending, Kristin, that happened many, many years later. I was in the 4th grade. I had already crashed my motorcycle and ripped my hand. So I had a bunch of stitches, and I was not supposed to play sports. Tell that to a 4th grader, right?
Yeah, right.
So as soon as the teacher turned her back, man, I'm in the baseball game or softball, whatever we were playing. So I get up the bat. I'm trying to hold the bat the right way with the stitches in my hand. I get a hit. I take off running. Sure enough, I trip. I hit hands first. I rip every one of those stitches out. Of course, I'm crying, and the teacher yelled for help. There was I think he was a junior at the time, was way over on the other side of the field. He sprints over to where the elementary kids were playing, grabs me, scoops me up, and carries me to the office. Now, for him, that probably didn't mean that much. But there was some kind of solace because I was in pain. I was about to cry. Of course, I was holding back tears. I wasn't going to cry in front of a junior in high school. But his kindness in that moment, he was like, "You're going to be okay, buddy." He was just saying reassuring things. Took me to the office. I had to go, of course, get restitched and answer to my mother. But all of these years later, Kristin, you and I have talked about it. I don't know if I mentioned it on a podcast, but we did a celebration of life. And on my social media post, my sister and I sang a couple songs, and I was kind of the MC of this thing. My aunt and uncle had passed away like a year ago, and they brought their remains back to Virginia. So believe it or not, we are at this fire department where we're holding this celebration of life. And in walks none other than David Tolliver. He is the same guy that picked me up. So I pulled him over and I said, David, it is so good to see you. We hugged. Now, we had played some music together later because he's a drummer. But I was able to thank him again, remind him of the story, which he had no memory of, because people who are altruistic, he didn't count that as a trophy. He was just doing probably what he did many times in his life. But it was just so cool to get to tell him that and tell him how much it meant to me for a high schooler to scoop me up, be nice to me, and go on. So that was a moment that I still remember.
Wow. I love that story. I wish I knew the kid's name that had an impact on me. He was actually, it's funny, your story here. He was a fourth grader and I was a kindergartner. And I remember being just terrified. Like your very first day of kindergarten, I rode the bus and went to school. I didn't know how I was going to find my classroom. So I remember asking this fourth grader, can you show me where this classroom is? So for the first week of kindergarten, he walked me to class. And then the beginning or the Monday of the second week, I was expecting him to walk me to class. And he was like, okay, you're going to need to find it. You're on your own this week. I'm going to bring you halfway there. And you need to be able to find it. And so he did. He stood halfway there and I found it. But I just loved, that meant so much to me. And he was like this big, of course, I don't even know, he was a fourth grader. So he seemed really huge to me. This big burly fourth grader. I don't know his name. I wish I did. But he made a huge impact on me because he showed me so much kindness when I think so many fourth graders would just think a little kindergartner was a nuisance, right?
I can see little Kristin walking down, trying to find her classroom.
I'm not great with direction. I still am not. And I hear my husband when he's training people in law enforcement. And that's one big thing is knowing how to get to calls. If you're radio and you don't have your maps and all the GPS and everything, you need to be able to get to calls. So you need to know the grids. And I'm like, oh man.
Kristin, you and I are so much alike with organization. And if I've got a weakness, I tell people I'm directionally challenged.
Yes.
And I have to really focus. And I tell everyone when GPS came out, it was TomTom was the original. I went, oh my God, this is the greatest invention of the 20th century.
Yeah.
I'm like, I would have traded this for TV. I mean,
believe me, I'm with you.
Okay. So Kristin, that was a great story about you trying to find her classroom, but you told me
you
told me one offline.
Yes.
And I think our listeners deserve to hear that story. I knew you were going to do
this to me. Okay. You're going to hold my feet to the fire.
I'll tell it if you don't. So do it.
It's risque. So, and I didn't know necessarily how impactful it was, but I still remember it. That's for dang sure. Okay. So I believe I was a first grader at this time. And this gal that I had been friends with all through kindergarten, all through first grade, this is on the playground and she has a booger on her finger and she goes, wipe this on the wall for me. And I was really nice. I am a nice person. I've just definitely found my voice. And I was like, no. And she was very assertive. And so she said it again, wipe this on the wall. There was like a brick wall right by us. And I'm like, no, I'm not going to do that. And she was so mad at me. She didn't talk to me for the rest of the year. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, like that is okay. And I actually had right there, even as a first grader, 6 years old, I knew there was something rotten there inside that gal. Not only the booger on her finger, something was wrong inside. And Kristin, so I stayed away for the rest of school, quite frankly.
Want to take too much time, but I have questions. Number one, did you take possession of the booger?
No, it was literally on her finger. She was like trying to delegate wiping it onto my finger and then me wiping it onto the wall. I mean, who does that?
She's probably a CEO somewhere.
No, actually.
No,
ended up not being a good situation.
Of course.
Sometimes you see somebody pop up and you're like, yep, that's what I figured. And
Isn't it
not a good track
interesting?
record.
I can remember, until you get like second or third grade, boogers come up a lot. It seems like.
But have you ever heard of someone delegating the actual disposal of their own booger? I mean, that just takes something's off.
If you've been with us from the beginning, we've got the tapeworm saga. Now we got the booger saga. Where leadership meets entertainment,
yeah,
folks.
here's the entertainment. But that stuck with me. And it's one of those things where, if you were just the nice person and, okay. And then you feel like crap about yourself for making a decision that you didn't want to make. You made it anyways because you didn't want to hurt feelings or make waves. And that really plays out so much into life today, right? So I'm glad I made the decision I didn't. It seems like a no-brainer for most people. But, when you're caught up in it and it's someone that's been your friend every single day, that can be a really awkward moment.
No, it is. It is. It's all fun and games until, never mind. I can go on and on. People lose all respect for me. Now we've talked about empathy besides the booger. We've talked about empathy. The guy carrying me to the office, this kid helping you find your classroom. But sometimes it takes authority. It takes a bold statement to really have an impact. For example, your husband's a police officer, and I was at one time, and you have to find your voice, and you better find it quickly. But I've had someone make a bold statement, someone, as we said, show empathy. It might be a nurse who just jokes with you a little bit when you're in a crisis. But again, it's those people who are able to read the situation and meet the need that is required. One time, Kristin, I got off the elevator. It was the craziest thing happened. This was before they moved the magnetometer. So basically, there was a post office in the bottom of the federal building. So anyone could just come in and out the bottom floor. Now, we had court security near the elevator downstairs, but you could come in and out as you wanted. All of a sudden, it sounded like elephants, like a herd. The door opens on the elevator. I look, there's probably 30 juveniles in the bottom floor of the federal building. And there's a fight that has broken out. And as you can imagine with these fights, they didn't have cell phones then, but they've taken sides. There's cheering on, here we are in a federal building. And I literally put my hand on my gun. I wasn't sure what to do, to be honest, because there was way too many juveniles for me to try to find the exit. About that time, there was a court security officer who was a retired police officer. Now, he already had he had one of those deep voices. He yelled so loud, "Stop!" It echoed. And everyone in there froze. He said, "Get out of the building." And they turned around and he said, "Now." And he's walking right behind them and he took them all out of there. I was always amazed with that because I don't know what I was going to do. I honestly do not know. But boy, did he take care of the situation. And I'm talking about it all these years later on a podcast. So be a person that sees the need, take the opportunity and fulfill the need. And you will be a person of impact. Back to you, Kristin.
Oh my gosh. Well, that just made me think of, I went to the movies the other day with my daughter's friends and their moms. And we saw Wonka, great movie, by the way. But a few rows ahead of us, it was like constant teenage talking at normal volume, just a complete disregard for everybody else in the movie theater. And it wasn't just every now and again, it was the entire movie. It made me think of when I was in Queens. That's how it was. But what happened was there was a man and his family in the same row, and he stood up and basically said, "Out, you're out, get out." And we thought it was someone who worked there. So he took control of the situation and everyone was clapping. And it was something where the rest of us had sat there for an hour and we were irritated, but he actually did something about it. And I will remember that because it's like, all right, wow. It's so nice when someone actually takes control. Yeah. And I think those kids will remember that. Did I share that already? Gosh, I feel like I'm a broken record on that one.
No,
Okay, good. I was really hoping I didn't share that the last episode.
you didn't.
But yeah, you know that feeling? You're like, I've told this story
This is all a
before.
dream, Kristen. You're
That's
not
a
even on a
pet peeve of
podcast.
mine. Well, I have this, it's a pet peeve of mine when someone tells me the same story multiple times and then you're stuck because you don't want to just call them out on it. So I'm like, oh, I don't want to be that person. But anyways, that was impactful. So people who are impactful, they exhibit consistency. And so, people are going to balk at listening to opinions from those who don't walk their talk. But they want to know what you do matches who you are, right? So, of course, people are going to make mistakes and misjudgments. No one's perfect. But discovering a fundamental disconnect between the image someone projects in public and their actual habits and lifestyle in private, that's going to be what jars the onlookers, right?
Yeah.
And we talked about that in the last episode where I was talking about being more tidy, and you said you're going to call me on it, make me take pictures of my house, and that we're half kidding there, right? But it's like I could project myself as a super tidy person who has everything all together, and then someone comes over and my house looks like a disaster, a bomb went off. So you want to make sure you're actually consistent with what you're saying is actually what you're doing. People will call you on it really quick. That's for sure.
Yeah, no, that's a fact. So I wanted to share another story, and this is about commitment. And we're living in a time, and I'm sorry to pick on Gen Z because sometimes I'm on their side, but I have so many employers that happened again the other day that saying that people won't show up on time, people don't follow through with the things they say they're going to do. And that's some of the fundamentals that we need to really be encouraging as a community, as parents, and so forth. So this really stuck with me. My aunt, Jean Mullins, she taught school for over 40 years. There's tons of stories about her, but she was my English teacher when I was a junior, which was awkward because I'd always called her Aunt Jean and I had to call her Miss Mullins, which was very awkward.
That would be.
But anyway, at her funeral, the pastor gets up and it's packed and he starts talking about her. And she would always knit these little, are they called booties for babies?
Yeah.
Baby booties.
Yeah.
And not to be confused with big booties, this baby booties. And
oh my God.
She would knit these. And he's telling this story about how she always was there baking cakes, doing things. And then he said, and how about those baby booties? And he reached in his jacket and he holds up one that had been knitted by her that was given to his daughter. And he said, raise your hand if you've had some baby booties. And almost the entire people in the funeral home, all over the pews, raised their hand. And it created a good laugh. But it was so memorable because she did exactly what you're talking about. She did have empathy. And she did show concern, but she also had that follow through. She was consistent. And everybody had those baby booties, and it meant a lot to all of us. It was like a healing as we laughed.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. That's really incredible. I could see that would be a tearjerker for sure. I just saw, as you guys can tell, I like movies. So I just went and saw The Boys in the Boat. So true story about the row team for University of Washington. And this is, I believe it was 1936. So we're talking after World War I, the Depression era. And it showed this scene where we all know this, but to see it, where all the men are showing up every day because they're trying to earn money, and the boss is only selecting a few, right, that can go off for the job for the day, and the rest in tattered clothes walk off, heads hung low. And you think about those tough times that made tough men, and today nobody wants to work. And then they were begging for anything. They would take anything. They would show up and every day just waiting for any work that they could get their hands on. And it really made me ashamed when I was watching that. It really made me ashamed of the younger generations and just disappointed. And I'm really hoping that more and more come to find, how much good can come from hard work, just self-worth. We talk about why depression is so high in the youth. Why? Because you're not working. You're not doing anything that makes you worthwhile. So yeah, that was a powerful moment. All right. I'll move on to people of impact are open-minded. I talked about that a little bit in the beginning, where you have to be a good listener, right? Be open-minded. Many people are so stubborn that they refuse to change, even if the change is right in front of their face. So don't allow pride or your stubbornness or doubt to stifle you from growing. Don't be one of those people who are like, I'm just set in my ways and I'm not willing to learn or grow. Don't enable people to say, you know how he is, you know how she is, right? You don't want that said about you. And gosh, that makes me start thinking about half my family. I say that about. Are they saying that about me? That is the question.
Kristin,
We'll
we
see.
don't want you completely ostracized here, so don't bring up names.
I know, right? Tempting, but I'm not going to. So open-mindedness, it's a concept that appears to be dying in American society. I mean, gosh, we see that every day on the news. You're either this or you're that. You're no longer willing to really be willing to understand both sides. And that could be as simple as I like to, when I want to know more about a subject, I know a lot about or a little about a lot. When I really want to understand something, I'm going to pull up completely opposing views, either newspapers or news, could be CNN, Fox, right? And then you get from each side what you can, and then you find your own place. Maybe it's in the middle, right?
Yeah.
So it's really important to be able to understand both sides, just not your own. You may disagree with another person's viewpoints and opinions, but if you can understand where they're coming from, so to speak, you can have a positive impact on their life. And, that quality gives you perspective and allows you to identify with the other person's needs and goals.
No, it's very true. People are they're more likely to be swayed if you feel what they feel. I had someone that I really disagreed with them on a topic, but they had gone through a situation that I didn't understand. And when I heard the situation, I was more empathetic. Now, there's a lot of things that are anecdotal, and this is a problem. Like, just because it happened to you doesn't mean it should change the whole world. So you have to decipher that. But it did make me more empathetic toward, this person and the viewpoint. And I could see why this person had the viewpoint. But we are in a time when you just cannot have opposing views. And it's really sad. And by the way, I don't know what difference we can make, but it's going to destroy our country. You should be able to disagree. And I've got only a handful now of friends who have opposing view. Well, I say a handful, it's less than that have opposing views that I can sit down and talk with, like talk policy without getting into immature name calling or something. So anyway, Voltaire had it right when he observed the ear is the avenue to the heart. And I think that's such a powerful statement. If you listen, you might hear something that causes you to change. Maybe it's just a little, right? It doesn't have to be your complete philosophy. All right, next, and this is one of my favorite topics because I dealt with this. This was my enemy when I was small. I've told stories about getting bullied and was afraid to stand up for myself, and I went through that whole ordeal. But people of impact exhibit courage. There's a difference in saying you're courageous and actually speaking up and doing something. That officer that got off the elevator, or when I got off the elevator, he could have come out of the office and just stood there, but he spoke up. He took command of the situation. You have the opportunity to show up when and where it matters. You have to do your homework and gather the facts to build your case. You have to listen to other people so you can present your case in an empathetic way that helps others meet their long-term goals. What we're talking about here, we mentioned coaching, is when I start coaching someone, I don't start judging right out of the gate. Like, they may be doing something really that is self-destructive. But I'm going to listen to them and get to know them, get to know their personality style. Then I take my openings and I start to ask, questions and so forth. But courage is something that if you don't have it naturally, I have known a few people that just seem like, they came out of the womb bullfighting or something. But it takes time to build that, but you can build courage, and it takes practice. You have to speak up in small ways, then you can speak up in large ways. You have to take a stand on something that you believe And by doing that with the other things that we've already mentioned and going to talk about, you might have the influence to change the course of someone's life. You might be able to help them not get in danger. But again, we have to speak up. I have said this before, Kristin, but it's so good I'm going to say it again. We all come to a wall of fear. We either chip away or walk away. And often our destiny, the great destiny, lies behind that wall. But so many people allow fear to cheat them out of their destiny. They allow fear to keep them in these abusive relationships. They allow fear to keep them in these horrible jobs. And it's time that we have to be courageous, and sometimes just change in and of itself takes courage. So I hope that helps someone think about where you are and start to muster the courage to change your circumstances.
Powerful. I love that. I know that made me think about, last week you were talking about the gal that's worked at the same place for 14 years, and that's not a negative thing at all. But to your point, it could be she loves the people she works for, but maybe she's been wanting to do something outside of waitressing and's been nervous and hasn't had the courage to do so. And there's so many examples of that out there. So I think that's incredible.
Yeah.
So something that, we talk about listening, and part of that is asking the right questions. So people of impact, they ask the right questions, and these people are going to ask questions and store knowledge. But on a deeper level, they get to know the other people and convey empathy and guidance where needed. Right. I think that's important to hang on to, where needed.
Yeah.
You don't need to guide every aspect of somebody's life. Quite frankly, they're going to get overwhelmed and shut down. Where needed is what you want to focus on.
I told you so. Sometimes you want to say it, but sometimes it's the worst thing you can possibly say.
Right. They will basically plug their ears if they're going to shut down. So that's a big one. And I'm just going to be vulnerable and share. I had a friend that had reached out to me. This is a few years ago, and her husband were arguing. And I am really blunt and straightforward, and I'm a problem solver, kind of like a dude, quite honestly. Like, that's my approach. And she was calling me, I come to find out, just for an ear. I saw some very clear strategies to turn around, right? Kind of change the trajectory of the direction they were going in. And I was like, okay, why don't you try this? Why don't you try? And she literally said, Kristin, I just need you to listen to me. And the wild thing is, I generally am a good listener. I just so badly wanted to help. Yes. And saw these clear, what I thought were very clear ways of fixing something. And, it was an eye opener for me, and I apologized, and I've learned from that. And I have to say, though I still feel the advice I was giving is pretty sound.
Of course.
Let's just be honest. It wasn't the right timing. Maybe the second phone call would have been better. Right. So it's something like that. So I am still learning these things. It's just navigating different personalities.
Kristin, I do have to jump in because I have to redeem something from last week. I mentioned that my predecessor had signed these extensions on these detailers, if you listened. And it made it sound like I was being negative to her. She did that in her frame of mind. She thought she was doing everyone a favor. But she was a phenomenal leader. And she called me in because I had just gotten selected, but she was still in charge. I was going to be replacing her. And she called me in one day, and it was hard for me to get any time with her because she was on her way out and doing other things. But we sat down, and she said, remember, some people, she said, don't try to fix everything. Some people just want to be heard. And that did not resonate that well with me. I mean, I was like, okay, cool, in my mind. And boy, did I realize later, because I'm like you, Kristin, I'm assertive, and I want to plug in that guidance. Right. I want to change your life. I want to rock your world. Yeah. I had to learn some people just want your attention. That is the answer, your attention or your concern or your empathy. Right. So it was a great lesson.
Oh gosh, I know and that's that's what I really like about how we approach this. We're not trying to stand apart from the rest. We're learning at the same time and sharing prior learnings. So I think that's really important that everyone can see we're human. We've made mistakes in the past before and we've applied them. And that's what matters is you rectify. And, on the topic of asking the right questions, when someone asks questions, you're letting them know that their opinion is important to you. And this also builds trust and over time will allow you to have a major impact on their life. So there's an old adage out there. People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care.
Wow.
Boom.
Yeah, that is absolutely true. And Kristin, that's right. If I were stepping into my leadership role as Academy Director, there is no doubt that I would have done things differently. But I tell everyone there's a big difference between training and experiential learning. And there are just so many things that you have to learn through experience. And you have to go into that position asking questions. One of the things I did do right is I met with every staff member. I said, give me your concerns. I had, a list of questions. What's your expectations of me? And I did expectations for the staff. So that was one good thing. But I'm saying, yes, I would change a lot. So listen, if I thought we were perfect or everyone else is perfect, there would be no need to have a podcast. I want this to be a resource tool that people can listen. And then when they either get promoted or they're managing people, or maybe it's their children, or maybe it's a situation like you talked about in the movies, maybe it's in the house at Thanksgiving, whatever it is, that you can step up, you can rise to the challenge when it's needed, but you also perceive the openings. But I guarantee you did this, Kristin, with that lady that you were talking to. I guarantee you didn't interrupt anymore. You got it. So there's also a moment where you have to have an epiphany and say, oh, I see. This thing has changed course. She's not looking for my advice. She just wants me to lend an ear. That's what makes a great leader. They can change course in an instant.
Yeah.
And that's what we have to be able to do. So I hope that this skill set that we've discussed, now I know courage is talked about a lot, but I think we have a unique perspective on it. But we could name 20 things for you to have an impact. There's no doubt about that. You got to be an expert in your field, a subject matter expert. Make yourself absolutely valuable so that if you left a position, there would be an opening and they know it, there would be a void. So all those things, but that gets talked about all the time. Yeah. So as we were picking these out, we wanted to discuss some that doesn't get talked about a lot. We threw in the courage in there just because everybody needs to be reminded of that.
Oh yeah, no, that's absolutely true. And I just think it's important. Everything we're talking about here, we've been through and learned from, right? And applied it. So I think this topic was a much needed topic. It's really cool. I'm working on, as most people know, I teach a 7th grade group of homeschoolers, and it's basically like a classical education. So like the college my dad went to and in the 40s and in the Bronx, right? It's like Latin, all this crazy stuff. But there's this whole bit on, we're doing a fallacy detective, and I'm going to be sharing some of my learnings. I just did a bunch of homework with my daughter today, and I had so many aha moments, and I'll be sharing them throughout the next couple podcasts. But communication, there's just so much to it. And so can't wait to share more.
Yeah, you better share more with me. I've got some presentations coming up. So
heck yeah.
If you are still listening, thank you so much. You guys are making this possible. We ask you, as Kristin said in the beginning, to please download the podcast, rate us, talk about it to other people. And I've had some cool things, Kristin, that I forgot to share with you, but we'll get into it later. But people are listening. People are making comments. I walked in a restaurant the other night, was recognized, and someone told me they listened, and it was just so, so cool. So awesome. We are very grateful. Even when, we get to be the #1 podcast, we're still going to be the same people. We promise you that. So Joe Rogan, step aside.
Yeah. Watch out, buddy. Excellent. No, absolutely. We're nothing without you. So thank you.
All right. Everybody, be the leader you're meant to be.
We'll see you next week.
The Dirty Side of Leadership podcast is brought to you by Forward Operations. If you'd like to book Ron or Kristin for speaking events, training, or executive coaching, visit forwardoperations.com. Be the leader you're meant to be.